a close family. And somebody asked me before if it would be a big funeral, and I said, oh, I think so. But you know how funerals are now. The towns are getting smaller and smaller, and people travel further and further. But it's a testimony to the impact Paul has had in our midst by the number of people that are here today. And the family is very thankful for each one of you and wanted me to make a special to say thanks to each one today. I want to, on behalf of neighbors and friends, speak to the family and say thank you for having a funeral today. And not everybody has one, and it's a wonderful gift to give to friends to be able to come at a time like today to share memories. And there's a lot of friends that Paul has made a big impact in their life, and it's hard for them to say, for you to say goodbye as well. So we're here together today, and I'm going to ask if you would just join with me, and I'll pray a blessing on you as we continue with this gathering. Father, thank you for Paul's family, first of all, and we all join our hearts together and pray for your blessing to be upon them, each and every one, to bring ministry of comfort. Jesus said that blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted, and we trust, Lord, that in the midst of our gathering today, they'll be comforted. We thank you for Paul, for the life he has lived and for the impact he's had in so many people's lives, and we want to honor him today, glorify you, so we pray that you'd be in our midst and help us today to share our love for you and for one another. In Jesus' name, amen. I guess everybody knows that Paul came from the other side of the pond, affectionately, and we've said those things lots. And we're going to ask Philip, a friend that came with him, who came from the other side of the pond as well, to come and just share remembrances and tributes to his friend. Philip will come join us.
Well, I don't normally speak to such a large crowd, but I don't think this young man would ever forgive me if I didn't. So, Paul and I met back in 1971, and we attended what was the first of our agricultural college days. A bit closer. Okay. And we started at one college where we took and basically it was the courses we had to take in order to go on to what was a residential college for a full year, where if we were successful in getting through the first college, then we would be able to study for what was the National Certificate in Agriculture. And anyway, I met Paul the first day of the day release college that we did first. And he was just so friendly right off the bat. And it was obvious to me that, and I think it was to Paul too, that we were going to become friends, and good friends too. And one of the things that he said on the first day, he said, rather than you come to college on your motorbike, why don't I pick you up in my vehicle? And he said, I have to drive right through your village, so I may as well do that. So the following Monday, I'm waiting at home, and all of a sudden I hear this vehicle pull up in front of the cottage. And the racket that was coming from that vehicle was just unbelievable. And when I went outside to get into the vehicle, it had only got 3 wheels. And so I said, what the hell did you get this for? He said, well, he said, it's you can drive this on a motorbike license. And he says, I don't have to take a driving test, I don't have to take driving lessons, and it's cheap. And when I got in the vehicle and we started our our first duo journey to college, it was quite evident that it was cheap, because we couldn't even have a conversation. The noise inside that thing was just unbelievable. And anyway, it was okay when we were going down the quiet country lanes, of which we travelled several. But as soon as we got onto the main highway, it was just bedlam. We just laughed because we couldn't talk to one another. And then if something like a semi went past, we went from 30 mile an hour up to 50 mile an hour in an instant, because basically the thing was built of fiberglass. And anyway, I think he kept that vehicle right up to actually when he first came over here as a trainee. And anyway, we passed our courses. We did well. And we carried on to Staffordshire College of Agriculture, where we were resident for a year. And it became quite obvious that Paul was up for a prank at any time. And he pulled all kinds of pranks against different students over the time we were there. And it was all in good fun. It was never malice or anything of that. He hadn't got a malicious bone in his body. And unfortunately, I was one of his victims of a prank. And my girlfriend and I, we decided that we needed somewhere quiet to drive to. And so we drove down to the far end of what was the horticultural department of the college. And no sooner had I parked up, we were completely surrounded in students, who then began to tip the car from one side to the other, whilst myself and my girlfriend were still in it. And it got to the point where I thought they were going to tip us right over. And anyway, I think they realized that too, because they quit. And the first voice I heard was Paul's, of course, and cheering and jeering and doing all of this. And then the following morning, I went down for breakfast at the college cafeteria, and I sat on the same table as Paul, along with 4 other students. And Paul, in his usual way, said, "So how did your night go last night?" And I said, "I knew it was you, yep." And he laughed, and then of course the whole table laughed, and then everybody else in the cafeteria wondered what the hell we were all laughing at. But that was it with Paul. He just had so much fun inside him. It was just unreal. And actually, during the time that we were at college, this fellow came over and spoke to us about working in different countries around the world. And the choice was Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And this guy was from a company which probably a lot of you may even remember, the Agricultural Exchange Association. And Paul and I both agreed that it was a no-brainer. We were going to come over here and do our exchange 6 months, as it was. And Paul came over in '75, and he worked for David and Pat Brassington, and he just had a ball while he was working over here. And then when he came back home would have been the October of '75, he was absolutely determined that he was going to emigrate. And so Paul emigrated in '76. I came over as an exchange student in '76 also, and I worked for, don't know if you know of them, Earl and Aileen Mays, out in a place called Phippen, south of Cutknife. And I did my 6 months there. And of course, with Paul being in this area, then he and I got to meet up lots. And then the following year, I chose to come again. And the second time I came over, I worked up in Marwayne for Ed and Jean Hames, and I did 6 months there. And I got to know quite a few of the host families that took on the students through that program itself. And I mean, it made my mind up too that I was going to emigrate, and it took me a little longer. I emigrated in '88. But it was just such a relief, I think, for me to be able to be closer to Paul, because we were so close. We were such close friends. And when I did emigrate, I thought I could surprise him, which is pretty difficult with that fella. And so I think I partially gave the game away. But between Paul and Judy, they had facilities available, I'll put it that way, that they knew I was coming. So what I wanted to be as a surprise, it turned out they knew full well. And I had the absolute pleasure of toasting Judy at Paul and Judy's wedding. And the following day, we had a get-together. I can't seem to remember whose place it was at, but we had a get-together, and Judy came up to me and she said, "Do you know what this did last night?" She said, "He sat on the end of the bed, he tipped out the money out of the cowboy boot that they'd collected for them and counted it." And I thought, well, if that's not Paul, I don't know what is. Paul always had his priorities. But Paul's exceptional sense of humour, of which I think was as English as you could get, certainly made him so endearing to people. And I witnessed that at Ty and Brianna's wedding. My wife Marilyn and I, we came over for the wedding. And I watched Paul just weave through the crowd. And it was just as I thought, geez, to have that much love and respect from everybody around you must be quite the trick. And but he was. I mean, he was such a loyal friend to me. And you often think, who could you trust with your life? Well, it would be Paul. He was an extremely proud Englishman. He was an extremely proud Canadian. He was an exceptional friend. And like the rest of you, I will miss him so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip, for doing that. Philip comes from BC, and it's been a fair journey just to get here to be there. I'm going to ask if David Babcock, who's a longtime friend for those who might come from a ways of Paradise Valley, to read a letter from Paul's brother, Martin. David, would you come?
Good afternoon. Excuse me. A brother's tribute. This is called Paul, he says. Well, I guess this is it, Paul. I thought you would have had a few more years left on this planet to share it with Judy, Jillian, Brad, and Steele, Brianna, and Ty, and all your friends. Life takes us all by surprise. We were 5 years apart, and you were 4 years younger than our sister Sue, who tragically left us in 2015 at the age of 64. Our personalities are different, but at the end of the day, you're my brother, and I loved you. I do remember certain things growing up together in the UK before you left for Canada. You certainly livened up the Harrison household. In the early 1960s, we moved to a place known as the Sandhills. We moved into a 3-bedroom, semi-detached house with a back garden 30 feet wide and 100 feet in length, and it was all grass. In those early days, Dad used to mow it with a hand-rolled mower. It had a razor-sharp red blades with a heavy steel roller at the back to flatten the grass and give those lovely stripes that you see on a lawn. Well, one day, you took over the mowing duties, and for some reason, Your school blazer blew off the washing line and landed in front of the mower. You didn't see it, and you went straight over the blazer. Not only was grass flying everywhere, but different parts of your blazer as well. Well, that didn't go down well with Mom and Dad because they had to buy you a new school blazer, but you thought it was hilarious. When we lived in the Sandhills, we both attended a primary school in the village of Stonehall. We schooled together for about a year before you went to Shire Oak High School. During that time at primary school, you were known as Big Harry, and I was known as Little Harry. I always wondered if it was because of our height difference. In those days, we shared a bedroom that had 2 single beds. During the time we shared together, we were at different stages of our childhood, but you were my big brother. In your teens, you worked on a farm in Fradley. It was about 6 miles from the farm to our house in the Sandhills. You had a little Honda 50cc moped at the time, and it broke down about 5 miles from home on the A38 one day. You couldn't get it started, and you had to push it all the way home. There were some funny moments, though. November the 5th is an important day in the UK. Guy Fawkes nearly blew up the Houses of Parliament in 1605, and ever since then, we remember that day by lighting a bonfire and setting off some fireworks on the 5th. Well, our neighbors at the Sandhills, Penny and Tony Lester, used to have a massive bonfire in their garden and would invite our family over every year. This one year, the bonfire was lit, and it was really blazing. It was crackling and spewing flames, and heat from it was tremendous. In those days, you could buy a box of standard fireworks and get them from any retailer. Well, you want to be the first to light a firework, and you did. Unfortunately, you left the lid off the box of fireworks. A spark from the bonfire landed on the open box of fireworks, and all hell broke loose. Rockets that travel about 300 feet in the air and go about 200 miles an hour were traveling sideways. All of us just dropped down to the ground to get out of the way, and all we could see was fireworks flying all over the place. Catherine wheels, which are about 4 inches in diameter and usually nailed to fence posts and whirl around at high speeds, well, they took off like miniature jigsaw blade, flying at high speed, and what a night that was, and it was a funny night. In the 1970s, the big thing was home brewing. This suited you down to the ground. You could save money and still have a drink. You bought a home brewing kit. It made about 5 gallons, which filled about 30 to 40 bottles. At the Sandhills, there was a staircase with a storage cupboard underneath. It was ideal to store bottles of beer because it was dark, dry, and cool. Well, you followed the instructions and eventually filled the 30 to 40 bottles with this beer. All you had to do was wait a few days for it to mature, and you could drink to your heart's content. One day, all these bottles and shooting them up and hitting the underside of the staircase. The beer was bursting out of the bottles, and it was going everywhere. It was like watching miniature versions of Old Faithful at Yellowstone Park. The storage cupboard stank for weeks after. Because you had a motorbike license, the law in the UK allowed a motorcyclist to drive a 3-wheeled car. You bought a Reliant, which was the go-to car in those days. It had 1 wheel in the front and 2 in the back. It was a dark gray, if I remember correctly. It was made of glass fiber, weighed nothing at all, and had an engine of about 60 cubic inches. Not the same power output as the 454 cubic inch GMC Sienna Classic that you once had in the 1980s. You told me once that when you were attending Rod Baston Agricultural College, you drove the Reliant back to your digs. If you were going too fast, you sometimes flew around the corners on 2 wheels. That gave you a big laugh doing that. In the mid-1970s, you settled in Canada and were living in Edmonton. In 1979, you invited all the family. Well, Sue couldn't come because she was dentist at the time, but you invited the family to visit you and stay for a few weeks. We did a tour of the Rockies, amongst other things. One of the funniest things that happened was on the Jasper Sky Tram. Mom didn't like heights at all, and she was very nervous all the way up to the top. We got to the top, had a look around, and then got on the Sky Tram for the descent. As the Sky Tram was descending, you decided to rock the tram. Well, Mom was having kittens, and we all thought she would have a heart attack. Well, we all had a good laugh about it, though, and Mom also saw the funny side of it as well. It's not a surprise you would be a success in life. You had the personality for it. You were outgoing, liked to laugh. You were solid, dependable, steadfast, saw a job through, worked hard, saved your money, and it paid off. You made a success in Canada, and that's reflected in having a great family and good friends. You have the most important people that loved and cared about you right here in front of you at your funeral. Judy is a lovely person, has been a wonderful wife and mother. You should be proud of Jillian and Brianna, who have turned out to be great kids and are living a life that is down to you and Judy. You left a mark on your 68 years on this planet, Paul, and you've done a great job. I loved you in my own way, Paul. We had our differences, but that didn't mean I didn't think a lot of you and loved you as a brother, because I did. It will be strange that you won't be around anymore. You take care in heaven, and God bless you, Paul. Love, Martin.
Thanks, David. It's too bad we don't get to and it's not just an ornament. Paul's ashes are in there, and Ty and Brad made that as a labor of love for Paul's final resting place in PV, so it had lots of meaning. And just wanted you to draw attention to that and what a beautiful idea and thought that was, and meaningful for their family. I'm going to ask if Brad and Brianna, sorry, I'm old, would come up and share a tribute from them about their dad and their father-in-law.
It may be hard for some of you to believe, but at home, Dad was quiet. Instead of sharing about himself, he would always ask how our day was and want to hear about what was going on in our lives. However, when it came to being out in public, he sure liked to liven up the party and certainly didn't mind being the center of attention from time to time. So I hope you don't mind, Dad, but today is all about you. Any job or task that needed done, you always said it's all by the hour. Well, I'll do you one better, Dad. I'm not charging by the hour, but instead by the minute. I definitely got my overthinking nature, sarcastic comment making, generally happy mood, particularness, and love to make people laugh from my dad. He would treat everyone with the same respect, no matter who you were, and would always take the time to say hi and make conversation with friends, neighbors, and even strangers. Qualities that I so greatly admire about him and have tried to incorporate into my own life. Everyone knew Dad, I think because he made his presence known and always left a lasting impression. All I ever had to say was I'm Paul Harrison's daughter, and that was the only introduction I needed. On more than one occasion, I would get the compliment, I sure like your dad. Maybe it was the accent, or the smile he always had on his face, or his kind nature. I'm not exactly sure. But the evidence of today makes me so proud and honored to be his daughter. Dad worked hard for us so that we could have the experiences and opportunities that he didn't necessarily have growing up. He was my example of how to put in a hard day's work without complaining, how to keep going without quitting, and how to take life as it comes and make every day count. I'm not sure who I will go to now for good advice or the sometimes unsolicited opinion. It was often joked that Dad had many girlfriends. I'm not sure if that was because he would often come home with various baked goods, or maybe that was just him getting the boys fired up at the coffee shop about their wives. Either way, I have no doubt that our mom was the love of his life. It must have been a bruise to the ego that Dad would have to look up at both of his sons-in-law. But at the same time, I know it gave him so much pride knowing his daughters had found good, kind-hearted, and respectful men to share their lives with. People like their dad. After some of the stories I have heard over the last couple weeks, I have learned that Jillian and I were absolute angels growing up. I certainly can't imagine staying out all night with the boys or driving 3 vehicles wide, full throttle down Highway 16 on your wedding day. I'm sure some folks up there are saying, "Who let you in here?" All jokes aside, my dad was always an example of a good man. I could never understand why he wouldn't let us have pets growing up, till now. Loss is hard. Saying goodbye to someone you love and who was a part of your life for so long is hard. But I do firmly believe it was better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. I find peace knowing I will see you again one day. You would often be sitting in the truck waiting for us women to be ready to go wherever we were going. Us 3 were always making you fashionably late, so I like to look at it now as you're on time, getting the party started, but you're once again waiting on a woman.
Paul and I shared 33 truly joyful years of the deepest love, happiest marriage, and truest partnership that I could ever imagine. My dearest Paul, my best friend, my partner, my soulmate, my inspiration, gave me the experience of being deeply understood, truly supported, and completely and utterly loved. I will carry these with me always. Paul was my steadfast rock who supported and loved me and was always there to help navigate life's challenges. When I was upset, he stayed calm. When I was worried, he said it would be okay and that I worried way too much. Most importantly, Paul gave us the 2 most amazing daughters. Our dearest Jillian and Brianna. Paul was such a proud dad. He was completely dedicated to his girls and loved them with every breath. And their strength through this difficult time is the best sign that I could have that Paul is still here with us in spirit. My heart is broken, but I am equally and eternally grateful, even in these last months and days of complete and unexpected sorrow, the darkest and saddest moments of my life. I know how truly blessed I have been because of you. 33 years and 1 day of being Paul Harrison's wife, and her nearly 30 years of being a parent with Paul is perhaps more luck and happiness than I could ever have imagined. I will be forever grateful for every moment we shared. I will forever miss Paul's morning goodbye hug and kiss, and evening welcome home hug and kiss. Thank you, honey, for reminding me every day of your love. As we say goodbye, Paul's spirit, his soul, his laughter, his amazing ability to give is still with us. It lives in the stories people are sharing of how he touched their lives, in the love that is visible in the eyes of our family and friends. In the spirit and resilience of Jillian and Brianna, Brad and Ty, and our dearest grandson, Steele. things will never ever be the same. But the world is a wonderful world. For many years, my dearest Paul lived. Paul is watching from heaven, and I know with a big smile saying, just keep going, get the job done, and make the best of each day. I love you always and forever, and I'll see you soon. Honey, your beautiful memories, deeds, and love will be my guide forever. Goodbye, my dearest Paul, till I hold you again. My love always and forever. Judy, XOXO. Dad, there are no words to describe what our family is feeling at this time. We are so grateful for the time we had with you and what you were able to accomplish with your time here. We know you are in a better place with no pain and enjoying the stories of others that have taken the step before you. I bet the ground up there is the best dirt you have ever seen and will make those backhoe jobs so much easier. I also believe the highways up there are smooth as silk for you to drive that semi on. I know you can see us all and surround us in every moment. I find myself staring up at the clouds and the night sky even more now. You taught me to look up there and figure out flight paths of jets and to catch the glow of the International Space Station as it passed by. But now I'm looking at the clouds, the sun, the moon, and the stars, knowing you are there. You were detailed and organized in every task that was given to you, and you did an incredible job with the results. You had your British wit and dry humor, which I admire so much. The hours we would spend watching old British sitcoms and you mimicking them were times I will never forget. The smile on your face was so contagious as you watched your grandson sit on your garden tractor. You were proud. I know you saw it from above, but the moment that Steele and Brad got to drive your backhoe and your backhoe truck around the yard was one that will remain with me in my memory forever. As you know, your grandson admires anything with tires and engines. I know you were proud in that moment. It excites me to this day. You took a dive into the cattle industry. It was just another thing that we could discuss and bond over. We will proudly carry on that 4 overlay ZH brand for you, Dad. I know that it has been a dream of yours since you moved to Canada, and I know you will take care of the herd from heaven with bountiful rains and tall grass. There are not enough words to describe the kind of man you were, but I know for a fact you raised me to know what a good man is, and to know the traits of one that I wanted to share my life with. You cared so much for Brad and welcomed him into your family with open arms. I am forever grateful to have had you as a dad and as a gramps to our son, and I will love you forever. British born, British bred, strong in the arm, thick in the head. That was Dad. This isn't goodbye. Just see you later. Love, Gilly. When I think of Paul, one thing stands out above all, and that's pride. Paul was a proud man, and there was nothing he was more prouder of than his family. Paul didn't share his emotions, but when he was with his family, you could see how proud he was just by looking at his face. The girls and Judy always lit up his face when he was talking about them. I was fortunate enough to be welcomed into this family and know how proud Paul was of his girls. Paul took great pride in his work. And a job was never finished until it was perfect and the customer was happy. His equipment was always in impeccable condition. I was fortunate enough to see the pride and love radiate from him the first time he met his grandson, Steele. Paul wasn't much for holding him when he was a little fella, but if you set him in his bumbo chair with his toy backhoe, Gramps would play at the table with him for hours. The very first time I met Paul, I made the mistake of hanging my hat on Paul's hook in the porch. He came in, shook my hand firmly, and said in his distinct English accent, "Not off to a great start. You took my hook, and you drive a Dodge." I was shaking in my boots. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what to think. I soon learned that Paul was my kind of guy, loved getting a rise out of people, and if he could stir the pot, he did it with both hands. It wasn't very long the next morning till we were out looking at that Dodge truck, and he was saying, "We better pop the hood and see what's underneath." It was a constant joke with Paul and I about the Chev and Dodge battles. I always bugged him that it took him longer to get places because he drove a Chevy, when in reality, he was just running on duty time. Paul was also a very caring man and made people around him feel special and important. When Paul and Judy would come to Kyle for visits, he would always visit with anyone or pitch in and help with whatever we were doing. I can't remember a time that I talked to Paul or seen him that he didn't ask, "How's Mom and Dad keeping? How's the rest of the family?" Followed by, "How's Kane and Jamie doing at the store and the farm?" The one we usually shared quite a few laughs over is, "How's Twitchy? Is he keeping busy and out of trouble?" Paul wasn't just asking to make conversation, he was asking because he genuinely cared. Paul raised the girls to know what they wanted in a man: kind, caring, gentle, hardworking, and with a great sense of humor, just like their dad. I may be biased, but I'd say they both knocked that out of the park by marrying Ty and I. Paul, your girls, and Judy are in good hands. Ty and myself will look after them the way you would have. I know you know that as you let us both have their hands in marriage. Paul, I promise you that Steele will know the amazing, caring, and loving man you were. Our plays on the floor with his digger tractor like Gramps' will be ever so much more meaningful and special, and we will cherish these times knowing that you're laying there right with us. I took Steele for a little drive in your backhoe truck and your backhoe the other day, and you couldn't wipe the smile off his face. He was grinning from ear to ear. When we pulled in the yard Sunday, he couldn't contain his excitement, yelling at me, "Dad, Dad, vroom, vroom," while pointing out the window at the famous blue and silver Harrison backhoe truck. You know this boy loves things with tires and engines, and even the little things like driving your garden tractor around the yard all by himself bring him pure joy. And I know every time you'll be there helping him. Something we will continue to do every time we come to Nana and Gramps' farm. One of the things I took great pride in was sharing with Paul that we both had our Class 1A licenses. We had many talks about hauling grain, coal. I even heard some stories of his fuel hauling days. Paul and I could even sit and just talk about semis. Ones we've drove, ones we liked. Just guy talk. I remember how worried Paul was when he was dealing with his heart issues, that they were going to take his license away, and he just wasn't going to have that. When they cleared him to drive, he was so happy, like a kid on Christmas morning. An old driving tradition, when a fellow driver passes, is to make a final call on the CB. I know this isn't a CB mic, but it'll have to do. So from me to Paul. Paul Harrison. Paul David Harrison. This is the final call, truckers, for Paul Harrison of Paradise Valley, Alberta. I hope you have your ears on up in the clouds. Paul was a loving husband, exceptional father, and one heck of a driver. Paul went to be with the Lord and drive high in the sky. Paul, you can go on and rest easy. Drive those highways paved with gold. Enjoy the transmissions that don't grind. Highways with no DOT. Hauling loads with no set destination. Watch over us all as we make the miles. Please ensure I make it home each day to your amazing and oh so beautiful daughter and our special little man. Go on without worry. We've got your loads from here. I love you, Paul. It's not goodbye. It's see you on the other side. Love, Brad.
We haven't got any singing. It'd be nice to have a song right now. It's pretty raw emotions as they share their father's love. I'm going to ask David Babcock to come up now and just to share a letter that's very important today.
I'm honored to read to you the tribute that Paul's family has written. They wrote it from Paul's first-person point of view. I guess my only regret is that I would love to have been able to read at least one sentence using that wonderful British accent that Paul used. But let's hear what Paul has to say to you, his friends. I was born in Wednesfield in the county borough of Wolverhampton, Staffordshire, England, the 10th of February, 1955, to Arthur and Joyce Harrison. I became the younger brother to my big sister, Susan, and 5 years later, I became the big brother to my little brother, Martin. Susan's and Dennis's daughter, Laura, was born in 1982, making me an uncle. I was very proud to be from Staffordshire and would always say, Staffordshire born, Staffordshire bred, strong in the arm and thick in the head. Meaning I believed you should work hard, but could be a little stubborn too. I'm very fond of my British roots and had a great life growing up in England. I was at Agricultural College where I learned about the IAEA program. I could have gone to Australia, New Zealand, or Canada. I knew right away where I wanted to go, and thus my Canadian story begins when I arrived at Paradise Valley in April of 1975 from Staffordshire, England, at the young age of 20 as a trainee with the International Agricultural Exchange Association. My Canadian experience began on the farm of David and Pat Brassington, a few miles southeast of Paradise Valley. I worked with them on the farm until my program ended in November and I returned to England. Paradise Valley had truly opened their hearts to me, and upon my return home, I told Mom and Dad I wanted to emigrate to Canada. They were overwhelmed, but knew everyone had been so kind to me and how much I loved my stay in Paradise Valley. They supported my decision, and the paperwork process began. I returned to Paradise Valley in April of 1976 as a landed immigrant. My heart was full. I stayed in Paradise Valley until June of 1978, when I found curiosity calling me to the city. I moved to Edmonton to work in construction and eventually started Harrison's Bobcat Service, undertaking landscaping and excavating projects. I enjoyed my time in Edmonton, but it only seemed fated that I would come back to country life. And so I returned to Paradise Valley in 1984. I started Harrison's Backhoe Service and worked for Tucker Racing, delivering farm fuel while staying with David and Pat Brassington. February of 1987, I began making travel plans back to England. Art, Joyce, and Neil Brassington were joining me on this visit home. Jerry Duhame at Royal Travel had always helped me arrange my travel plans, but on this occasion, a young travel agent, Judy, would assist me. Who was to know she would one day become my wife and best friend? We began dating in July of 1987, and in July 1988, I took Judy home to meet my family. During that visit on a sunny English day in July, kneeling on British soil at Sandringham Estate, I asked Judy to be my wife. Fortunately, her reply was favorable, and so our love story continued. Together, we moved to the Frederickson homestead south of Paradise Valley. Lyle and Carol Anderson rented the property to us as we began our life journey together. 1990, I began with Hancock Petroleum in Lloydminster, continuing to deliver fuel. I kept the backhoe service going and did many jobs in the Paradise Valley community, and I was proud to say many customers became my friends. Judy and I were married July 21st, 1990, at the Anglican Church in Lloydminster. Oh my, what a warm day it was, but one I will always cherish. We purchased the homestead of Ralph Lifeson, Northeast 1046 2 West the 4th, from Ken Nelson in the spring of 1993. Ralph's wife, Audrey's maiden name was also Harrison, so our home is rooted with this British surname. We settled into Sandringham Estate the summer of 1993 and continued to enjoy our family life in our corner of the world. Jillian Elizabeth was born October 20th, 1993, and Brianna Louise, July 4th, 1995. My oh so proud to be dad, and I definitely became the minority in the Harrison household. Jillian and Brianna kept us very busy through the years, and looking back, we would not have changed one thing. We encouraged our girls to do the best they could be, work hard, never give up, and treat others with kindness. I said to Judy so many times that somehow along the way, we did something right, as God blessed us with two amazing girls. I'm so very proud of the amazing women they have become and the lives they are building with my son-in-laws, Brad and Ty, and so very proud to be gramps to our dear little Steele. I retired from the fuel business in April 2011 after 27 years, but I continued working with the backhoe and helping and raising heck on the Sunderland farm. It was a total privilege to be part of that Sunderland clan. I look back over the years and know community support and love from family and friends helped me realize that a country community is a wonderful place to live and raise your family. I was truly blessed to have chosen this part of the world to live my life. I was at the stage when I could begin to slow down and smell the roses, as they always say. However, God has a different plan for me now. So to you all, I only say, So long for now till we meet again, and always remain humble and kind. Take care. The old Brit forever, Paul.
Brian had asked me to scout out the coffee row, and they'd like to hear some stories of Paul and the coffee row because it meant so much to him, and yet there was not much spoken there, or it's veiled in mystery. I must confess I was a bit hesitant to do that. We don't even have to tell that to new members of the coffee row, but what happens at the coffee row stays at the coffee row, and only us and Janet know what happens there. And I say that so if there's anybody who wants to know what Janet or what coffee row does, they could try to get it out of Janet. She might be able to take a few offerings there for that information. It seems a bit redundant for me to stand and talk about all of the stories that we've experienced with Paul, and I'm sure I don't know them all by a long ways, but I know many, because Paul didn't live a hidden life, ever. And one of the amazing things about Paul was it's not an easy thing to immigrate or to move to a new town, let alone a new country. And it takes a bit to work your way in, but it didn't take Paul very long. Paul was a good worker, was professional in all he did, organized. One of the guys at the coffee shop was saying he always kept all the things that he might need in case of an emergency on a forklift. He'd come prepared. It'd all be there right handy. And one of the guys was saying that he wasn't here very long, and they had a cat, and working on the cat, and at the neighbors, Paul came along and give Paul about a 2-minute crash course on the controls and turned them loose. And of course, Paul did just fine. That was Paul. He was very good with equipment. There's stories like that in the shop, in the coffee shop, of appreciation and talking machinery, even as Brad has said. It's easy to talk with Paul if you're talking about machinery and nature and things. When I was thinking about it, looking back, it's almost 50 years that he come to this country. And that means we're old. It's not that funny. But there's an old saying that something never changes. Everything changes. And the second thing I think about that is something never changes except for Coffee Row. You can leave for 20 years and come back and they're talking about the same things. And I was thinking as they give me this task of learning about stories, there was an old Paul and there was a young Paul, and he was with us for almost 50 years, sharing our lives with us. He was a natural fit and a good neighbor, for sure. Was always aware, one of the guys was saying when he had the plow wind come through and absolutely destroyed a path there through our district, and Paul phoning him early in the morning, and he had already been around McLaughlin looking at the damage and phoning to see how he was doing. And that was the neighbor. That's Paul. He was always concerned about what was going on and how people were. And he wasn't very intrusive, but he kept an eye on things. and made a good neighbor. Paul was meticulous and a perfectionist. We wouldn't be able to live in very close quarters, Judy, me and Paul, because I drive him nuts because he was so neat, well done. And he dug the graves for as long as I know, every grave that was in PV after he come back with the backhoe. And I'm old enough to remember when we dug them by hand. And I remember enough about it that I know that it was a solemn occasion to dig the grave of a friend and a neighbor. And Paul dug a lot of them. And I'm sure it knit his heart to the community. And I'm sure it changed him and gave him a sensitivity to the time and hour that we had. I doubt if anybody else, but a few select people would know that Paul was fairly feisty. And we don't know Paul as quiet. We don't. He was feisty, and when we'd come into the Coffee Row, if Paul was there, the first thing he'd do is insult you, usually, to stir you up and get you going, in a good-natured way, of course. And he was no shrinking violet, and he fit in with our Western culture of doing pranks on especially newcomers. That's a great pastime of us guys. But we met our match in Paul, didn't we? Because he would, if he didn't repay us, he beat us to the punch. 100 different things. I was thinking of how Englishmen are prime targets for pranks in Western Canada. They don't even talk English, really, you know. And so we like to mock them and mimic them. But Paul could always one-up you. Yeah, he really could. One guy was remembered a guy mistaking Paul for being Irish. And that didn't go well. And another one that thought he was Scottish, and that didn't go well either. He was English, not just British. And Daryl never let it go, but it was a lot of fun to call him a Shacklefoot. And that he drove on the wrong side of the pond. He's all mixed up, those kinds of things. But he was never offended by it. For sure, Paul was never ashamed of his heritage. There's nobody here would ever even have a doubt about that. And that's a good model for us as well, because we're kind of living in a times where they kind of try to make us ashamed of where we come from. But that was never Paul's outlook on life. One of my early remembrances was at Dave's house, Dave and Pat's house. And I was over, I think it was after supper. It might have been for supper, but Paul was there, and David's new trainee, an Irishman. And I was there, and the Queen was over. And I can't remember what year it was. I should have been able to do the math, but I didn't take the time. But the Queen was over, Queen Elizabeth, for you newbies. And she was over visiting, and it was a solemn occasion, as the royalty was, and she was walking. And her husband was walking behind her, because she's the head of the state. And the Irishmen, and if you don't know politics, there's a certain amount of irritation between Englishmen and Irishmen that can be there, hey? Made the comment, oh, that Queen's a stuck-up me. She makes her husband walk behind her. And you cannot believe how fast Paul was this far from his nose. What do you know about it? You don't know nothing. You don't even speak about the Queen around me. And he said many, many more things. And I thought it was on. And a bit shaken by the whole experience. And it's no uncertain terms. If you're going to speak derogatory about the Queen, we're going to go outside. We're going to finish the conversation out there. Paul stuck to his guns and was very faithful. And I can say this honestly as a characteristic of Paul to be admired. He never turned his back on a friend or allowed him to be diminished publicly. I never heard it once, but I heard many times where somebody would make an offhanded, idle remark about somebody who was he was considered a friend, and he would correct them right now and wouldn't let it even have the least bit of ground. I don't know how much to say or not to say. I know that we've sat for a while and some of us got saddle sores. But there's something I need to tell about to this family from Coffee Row. And while they didn't say it in so many words, because they're not really all that mushy, for lack of a better word, but I think it's important, Brianna, that you hear this from our stories of the coffee shop, that Paul was very important to us, and he's one of us. He's a part of our community, and we will miss him. I could see that. We'll miss him. Not as much as you, but we'll miss him nevertheless. And we'll tell and retell the stories in Coffee Row for years to come about the exploits of Paul Harrison. And some of them will be true. And some of them will be a way more than true. I got to tell you one story, though, because I'd be amiss if you've invited me to tell you stories from Coffee Row, because this one is almost legendary in our secret circle, and I'm going to let it out tonight. Many of you won't know Bill Herbert. Bill Herbert was an elderly man. In fact, he became a senior citizen in a celebration year where they threw a party on, and Bill was part of that crowd. And Bill is gone now, and that out of that 65 club, I think they're 94. Does that sound right, Billy? Would you know how old your dad is? 97? Well, I missed a few years, didn't I? And there's 2 of them left, for information's sake, Shriel Mouse and Emily Welch. And Bill was of that crowd, just so you can kind of place the time of it. And Bill was a lot like Paul, although neither one of them would take that as a compliment, I doubt. Bill was very fussy as well. He's the only man I knew that every 6 months he changed the air in his tires so that they wouldn't get stale. And that was how fastidious he was. Very organized and anal and passionate about what he believes. If my hand goes like that, it's because Bill talked like that. When he really wanted to get to a point, he'd say, "There you are, mister," and kind of like that. The problem between Paul and Bill was that Paul liked the Oilers. Wayne Gretzky and Messier were his idols. They both were passionate about hockey. But Bill Herbert, alas, was a Calgary Flame fan. And of course, enough said. If you're over 40, you know what we're talking about. Hockey Night in Canada actually showed a coffee shop one time in Red Deer cheering when the Oilers and Calgary played, and there was mayhem in their coffee shop as one would score and the other, but they had nothing on PV and the feud between Bill Herbert and Paul Harrison. And the day after Calgary and Edmonton would play, people would come, the Coffee Row would come just a little bit earlier so we could get settled in, so we could see the show right from the very beginning, because it was going to be a show every time without fail. If the Oilers won, Bill would come trudging up, and you could tell what was going to happen there. And of course, Paul would have a grin from ear to ear and had been practicing all night for how he was going to jibe Bill Herbert. But on the other occasion, Bill would be just the same. And I don't know if it was when Steve Smith scored on our old goaltender or not. I think it was, but I was there. And anyways, Bill, you could see him coming up the street from away, walking with his measured stride, but only with a little bit of a jauntiness, and even his hat seemed a little bit on an angle. And Paul goes, "There he is. Look at him come." and was waiting, hey? So he locked the door, first of all. Not his garage, but he locked it anyways. And Bill was timidly knocking on the glass. Paul, oh, Paulie. And of course, Paul's not having it. So anyway, somehow, I can't remember all the details, but Bill got in, and Paul went out the back door because he's not going to take it. And Bill, you can't imagine the joy that's in his heart at what he's about to do, to gloat over Paul and the demise of the Oilers. But Paul slipped out around the back to the oil shed where the truck was backed up, ready for action always, and he went, and being a man of courage and boldness he was hiding behind the fuel truck. Bill's going to get his pound of flesh, so out he goes, and Paul climbs up into the fuel truck into the trough on the top. Steele's got one right there, and called in and hid. Grown man, yeah. From somebody who was 70 years old. He's tough. Anyways, he knew what he was doing, and so Bill was, oh, Paulie, come on down, Paulie, I know you're up there. And Paul's not moving, eh? So he'd take some gravel and he'd throw him up. Paulie, come on down. So, of course, Paul finally came down. Absolutely, all of the stories I could tell you are not far from that. Tomfoolery and foolishness, it seems, doesn't it? To anybody who stayed and withered and dry. But for us, it's the spice of life. And it's about sharing our life. And it's about kidding one another. And of course, we stoked Bill and Paul with all kinds of ammunition to inflict jibes to one another the whole time. And it's part of our fun. And I think Paul and Bill did it all with good humor, but sometimes it was hard to tell. They were so passionate about it. Paul's saying was, it doesn't matter, it's all paid by the hour. I think if anybody knows Paul and doesn't know that that was his saying, you weren't paying attention, because that was said pretty often. And I guess that comes from a guy who knows and stuff, but I think there's a lot there in being in the moment. And I think Paul had a great worldview that we could all learn from. Like, tomorrow has enough worries of its own, but we're on the clock right now, and what about now? We need to be about business. And Paul was always on duty. It seemed, we never saw him off. I don't know what the family saw, but he seemed to enjoy every hour. He seemed to enjoy life in whatever he was doing. And I suspect there was some very horrible jobs. Forklift guy or backhoe guys and sewers, like it's not all fun. But somewhere along the line, he learned to enjoy whatever circumstance he was in. And that's a wonderful attribute of Paul's. I want to also say that we haven't talked much about the spiritual life of Paul. And my grandfather was English as well, Church of Anglican Church, and maybe that's why I can see a little more about Paul from the upbringing. And my grandfather was a dour old Englishman, good guy for I'm sure not saying anything bad about him, but he was all about business, man. When you were a kid, you had to toe the mark and all that. And I got all of his books and stuff when Grandpa passed away, and I got his Bible and the Anglican prayer book, and I'd noticed that he would write in it. All kinds of things he wrote in it. And I know that was another side of him. And Paul was no doubt brought up to be a very private man about faith and spiritual stuff. I don't know how many people know this, but the United Church burnt down. It would be, I think, 1971, but I've been wrong about putting everything so far, so it could be wrong again. I believe it was. It dramatically blew up in a propane accident, blew it right off the foundation, and we were about 2 minutes away when it went, and I was 17, I guess, at that time, and it was pretty spectacular. And the church quickly rebuilt it, and they built a sanctuary and a little lean-to on the end of it there for Sunday school and stuff. But by the 1980s, the church got quite active, and we needed more Sunday school rooms, needed a kitchen, and a bit of a room for fellowship. So it's the only time I remember in the United Church they had a building program just for growth. And so they started this building program as the board. And I don't know how it happened, but Paul was headed it up. I don't know what you would call him, supervisor of that, but he ordered the cement and organized the crews and did the shingles and got the plans organized and the whole thing. And he was quite a young man then. There's a comment made by the minister one day. We were finishing up, I believe it was shingling, but it doesn't matter. And she come along, and she hadn't met Paul, and so she met him that day. And she was leaving, and she said, "You know, Paul, you remind me of a character in the Bible." And Paul goes, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she walked quite a ways, and then Paul said, "Well, who is it?" And she goes, "Well, it's Paul, the Apostle Paul." And I think Paul put it off as just, well, Paul and Paul. But it wasn't. I think what the minister saw was the tenacity with which Paul worked and did that. Paul said this before he died. Paul the Apostle. He said in 2 Timothy 4:7, just before he knew he was going to be martyred, he said, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith." And I want to read this scripture because if there's a scripture I could leave to you that would speak to you of Paul's life, I think it's this one. And it's Ecclesiastes 10:11, and some have heard me speak of it before. It comes right after the part about there's a time to live and there's a time to die and a time to be born. But Ecclesiastes 3:10-11 says this: "I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better than for them to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God." And I read that as a tribute to Paul today. I'll just say that you don't have to be a wizzled-up old grump to be a Christian. And Paul also was the usher in the Church of God. One of the stories came up about his ushering skills. And somebody had come, and Paul was tormenting him a little bit about being in church and showing him to his seat. So the guy just scooped him up in his arms and carried him and took him to the pew and sat him down with him. And Paul would laugh and laugh and laugh because life is a gift, and he enjoyed it. I'm going to close with prayer, and I'm going to close with the Lord's Prayer. And I know that Paul would have been taught that prayer, and that would be meaningful to him. And as a community, maybe we could go back to our roots and say that together as we pray. Father, I just again want to say thank you for Paul It doesn't seem to be enough. We're very thankful, Lord, for his gift of life and for it being shared with us. I know his family, as we have heard, treasure him as a husband and as a father and grandfather. And so we thank you for that, with hearts that it's hard to be parted, even spatially, from Paul. And we thank you for the hope that's found in Jesus for eternal life. And we thank you that we can come to you through the grace and the gift that you give us through faith in Jesus Christ. And I just pray for our community and especially for the family, that we would draw close to you and receive from that throne in a time of need. So we ask for your blessing of comfort and peace and courage and strength for each one to continue in what God has called us to be and do. And we gather together today and we pray a prayer that Jesus taught all who follow him. And we find comfort and strength in saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We're going to leave this place now, and I think everybody knows, have been around the block enough, but the family's going to leave for a few minutes, and that'll give us time to reorganize this so that we can set out some tables and chairs. If you're able-bodied, just find out where you can fit in and be a help, and it'll happen pretty quick. And we'll have time of fellowship at 7 o'clock. The family is going to meet at the Paradise Valley Cemetery for internment. And the family is inviting anybody, any friends, anybody who would like to come to join them. But you'll meet us right out at the PV Cemetery, which is about a quarter of a mile on the north side of PV. Ask for directions or Google it if you need be, and there'll be somebody can help you out with that. There'll be no funeral procession for that. We'll just gather and meet there. I think I've got them all. Will you stand with me, and I'll pronounce benediction. May our great shepherd lead us and direct us in all of our ways. May the fellowship of the Holy Spirit and the love of Jesus Christ be upon each and every one. In his name we pray. Amen.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I never knew. And I think to myself, What a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, yeah.
you.